favorite writers who've been going a long, long time, wrote a book on the vindication of the Trinity, John Owen, and it is a powerful, powerful work on the fact that God is three in one. Now, if you try to understand that, you may run into difficulty. That is one of those things we take by faith. And when you try to describe the Trinity, you run into a brick wall every time because much like what John says in Revelation, there's some things he mentions in Revelation that there's nothing on this earth like that. You ever seen a wall made out of transparent glass or transparent gold like you can see through? We don't have anything on this planet like that. And yet, in the mind of God, there's something like that. And that's good. I can't wait to see it. That's not the most important thing, but I can't wait to see it. Take your Bible and turn to Mark chapter 4. We're going to finish the 4th chapter up this morning. This is basically the chapter in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus talks in parables, and he has finished doing that. We saw in verses 33 and 34 that he finishes, and he did not speak to the people unless he used a parable, a heaven or an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. That's the simplest thing I can tell you about a parable. But this account, even though there are differences in the 4 Gospels, appears in every Gospel. Isn't that interesting? Beginning with verse 35. On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, that's the disciples, let us cross over to the other side. Now, when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. But he was asleep in the stern on a pillow. They awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this passage. Thank you that it tells us something about your Son and about you, because you are three in one. That is just mind-boggling. To think that you could speak to the wind and it would stop. But Father, we can't even imagine that. Hollywood, with all of their special effects, can't make that real. But your word says it, and we believe it. I pray that as we look at this account, Father, today, you would help us see that perhaps if Jesus was standing here today, he might say the same thing to us. Where is your faith? Or do you have any? So I pray you bless our time. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. This account, as I said, is mentioned in the other synoptic Gospels. I'm talking about Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it's even mentioned in a different account in the Gospel of John. The details are not the same. But the story is about Jesus calming the sea. If you remember in John, he comes to the boat at night walking on the sea. And in Matthew, the story is much the same as it is in Mark. In Luke, we see the story similar, but there's a few differences in there. We're not going to get into that. And while we're on that subject, you might wonder, why are there 4 accounts of Jesus' life and ministry? Why 4 Gospels? Well, each Gospel gives us a different picture of Jesus Christ. In Matthew, Jesus is pictured as the King of Kings, and especially to the King of Israel. The very first chapter says he would save his people from their sins. in Mark, Jesus is pictured as the servant of God. The word master in relation to Jesus is mentioned 16 times in 16 chapters. Jesus ministered to the people of God in Mark, and we're right there now. In Luke, Jesus is pictured as the perfect man. If you count, beginning with Genesis, and go all the way to the Gospel of Mark, you'll come to the number 42. The number 42, if you divide that, is 7 times 6. 7 being the perfect number, 6 being the number of a man. So you put those two together, you have the perfect man. And that's what Luke is trying to tell us there. Now John pictures Jesus as the Son of God and Son of Man. We call him the God-man. There are 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John, which refers to the name God gave of himself to Moses when he said, when Moses asked him, who am I going to tell the people has sent me? And God told him, tell them that I am has sent you. So it's a study worth undertaking to compare and contrast the 4 Gospels. We're studying Mark, and we found out a lot of things that might slip by if we're not careful. Matthew and Luke have a lot more parables, where Mark only lists 4. The Gospel of John has none, unless you look at John chapter 10 as a parable. But Mark's point here is that Jesus came to minister to the people of God and put the gospel out so that men might come to him for salvation. So let's consider this account that we read this morning and what we might learn from it to help us on our way. There's 3 considerations in this passage that will encourage us, and I pray this will help us trust more in the God we serve. I pray this is going to give you strength in these troubled days. The first consideration is in verses 35 and 36. Consider the company on the sea. Now, to set the stage, Jesus has just finished teaching from the bow of the boat. He taught the people in parables. These parables were designed to separate the sheep from the goats. It is a very large crowd. They stayed until Jesus and the disciples turned the boat around and left that area. Jesus suggests here that they go to the other side of the sea. You might think that Jesus only gave commands, but the interesting thing here is the words that he said, let us cross over to the other side, give us the idea that it was a suggestion, not a command. And so they took the boat, Jesus in it, and they began to cross the sea to the other side. And you'll notice, you don't often hear this, but here it is right here. They took along other little boats with him. There are other boats with him. Never forget the details of the Word of God, because you see, we often think that this miracle was just for the sake of the disciples and Jesus. But what about those in the other boats? They would receive the same miracle as those in the boat with Jesus. And this tells us just because we're in the boat with Jesus does not make us immune from trouble. It's a common belief that once a person is a follower of Christ, we won't have any more trouble. I hope you know by now that's not true. What is true is that we need to be with Jesus when trouble comes. Matter of fact, James told us that in chapter 1, verse 2, when he says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Notice James says, when, not if. When, not if. We will fall into various trials. But we will come through that trial if we're with Jesus and he's with us. So not only did the boat that Jesus was in find safety, so did the other boats with them. So not only did they both were rescued, that's the idea. So it's not just one boat, there's several. And while I'm on that, we find out that Jesus, when this windstorm rose, was asleep in the stern. The stern is the back of the boat. If you were ever in the Navy, you would know that. But just an easy way to remember that, because you get the bow and the stern. You got starboard, which is the right side, port, which is the left side, and all these technical terms. The gunnel. Sound like a funnel, but it's not. All of these things have to do with a certain place on the boat. And this boat that Jesus fell asleep in the back, must have been a pretty good-sized boat. We're going to talk about that as we get to number 2. Consider the state of the sea in verses 37 and 38. And a great windstorm arose. What drives waves? The wind. That does not mean that some current won't make a wave, but in this case, a great windstorm came. The waves beat against the boat so that water began to go in the boat and fill it. If you know anything about the Sea of Galilee, it is known for sudden, violent storms. This alarmed even those who made their living on this sea, seasoned fishermen. But this great windstorm arose, and the water starts filling the boat, but Jesus is sleeping in the stern of the boat. Now that tells us that the boat must have been pretty large. For the disciples and Jesus to be on board, it must have been somewhere around 30 to 40 feet long. Almost, we would call it a small ship. As I mentioned, the stern is the rear of the boat. If you're familiar with boats and boat motors, they have what they call a stern drive. It hooks onto the back of the boat. That's why they call it that. If you've ever been in rough water, the stern is the safest place to be. It's the smoothest place to be. You say, what do you mean by that? Years ago, when I lived with my mom and dad, my dad knew a lot of folks in the Tampa Bay area that had boats, and this one fella that my dad knew wanted us to go out with him one night, way out to the middle grounds, which is about 80 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. And he had, I think his boat was probably around 30 feet long. It had 2 Caterpillar diesel engines in it, and so my mom, my brother, myself, and my dad, and this fellow, 5 of us on this boat, we went out, and it was pretty rough. And the further out we got, the rougher it got. I don't get seasick very easy, but that night, it came a knocking. And I decided I would go up in the bow. There were bunk beds in the bow. That showed you how big the boat was. And lay down. I found out when you're seasick, that's the best thing to do. Just lay down. It's too late to take medicine then. But anyway, I went in there, and this water was so rough in the bow that I would have to hold myself in that bunk bed, because when the bow would go over a wave, I would come off of the bunk. That's how rough it was. I could tell you that we all perished, but you know that's not true. But we got out there the next morning when it started to get daylight. The fellow running the boat happened to open the hatch where the engines were, and they were half underwater. The bilge pump was not working. So we started working on that, and we turned it around and came back in. Never put a line in the water. But the stern of the boat is the smoothest place to be. Now, you might ask the question, why is Jesus sleeping? And that's a good question. Well, I think that shows us that the ministry is tiring. It is. If you ever do ministry for Jesus, you will find out what being tired is. It's not only a physical, but it is a mental tiredness. Billy Graham said when he was alive that preaching a 30-minute sermon was like working an 8-hour day. This not only shows us that Jesus was tired, but it shows us his humanity. And we talked about that, or sang about that, as we looked at these songs talking about the Trinity. Yes, he is God, but yes, he is also man. Theologians call this union the hypostatic union. Jesus had two natures. He was fully God, and he was also fully human. Now, if that's hard for you to understand, that's fine. We may not ever understand that. We are human. There's no divinity in us at all. And when you look at God, you know when he created everything in 6 days, 6 literal days, on the 7th day he rested. But he didn't rest because he was tired. He rested because he was finished. We do need rest. One of the doctors that Debbie saw just recently told her, if you don't get good sleep at night, your body will try and make you do it during the day. People who have to wear a machine at night to help them sleep better. Some of you know what I'm talking about. That's the reason for that. I worked with a fellow when we lived in Missouri that if he sat down and you didn't keep his attention, he went to sleep. It didn't matter where we were. It was always that way. Humans do need rest. But it also shows us his faith in God. Did Jesus know the storm was coming? I don't know. We'll have to ask him when we get there. It does not say. We don't know for sure, but we do know of his faith in God because Jesus knew how he was going to die. And it wasn't in a ship. As a matter of fact, he told his disciples more than one time, and it just went right over their head, didn't it? Matthew 16:21. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the 3rd day. Why did they not remember that? Jesus knew his life was in the hands of his Father. Therefore, he did not worry at all. Now let's make some application right there. In the midst of this virus, can we not do the same? If we're worried and fretful about this, how can we ever minister to those who are not believers? If we're afraid as our unsaved neighbors, what's the difference between us and them? Our faith should make us different. But if we act like the world, how are we different? The disciples, Jesus is sleeping, this great storm comes up. I thought it was interesting in verse 38, he was in the stern asleep on a pillow. I've got a boat, my oldest son has a boat, and I don't ever recall seeing a pillow on the boat. That's just not an article that you normally take on a boat, but obviously this boat's big enough to sleep in, so there's a pillow in it. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? The disciples show their lack of faith. They wake Jesus, and the question they ask is very revealing. The King James says it like this, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And I often thought as I read this, what did they expect him to do? If they're afraid before he does anything, and afraid after he does something, what did they expect him to do? Why wake him if he's not going to do anything? It seems at this point they're not fully convinced that he is God. And how many times have we prayed for God to do something amazing, and when he does, we can't believe it? What did we expect him to do? We're just like the disciples. I think sometimes people have just enough faith to be saved, but that's it. Don't ask me to do anything else. And then they call that fire insurance or some other silly name. If we refuse to grow and become mature, we are just like the disciples in the boat that day. I remember a fellow mentioning this to me years ago. This is a what if thing, and hopefully you don't live your life according to what if. None of us should. But what if when you get to heaven that God says you can spend the first 1,000,000 years with those whom you've discipled and won to Christ? Would you be by yourself for the first 1,000,000 years? Why is it that most who call themselves Christian are content to live a defeated life? And then when you ask them about it or confront them about it, they simply say, well, that's just the way I am. No, that's just the way you was. Not supposed to be the way you are. But I don't want to stay there and look at the negative. Miss Carol, you know what I thought of when I read this passage. There's a song in the Broadman hymnal called Peace Be Still. And it's based on this passage. But number 3, verses 39 to 41, consider the power of Jesus Christ. Man, this is amazing. Verse 39, then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. He gets up from his sleep, rebukes the wind, and says, peace, be still. Now that probably doesn't really resonate with us, but this word peace is a word that's often used when addressing a child. Hush, be calm. And yet it's in the imperative mood. It's a command. The wind has no choice but to do what it's told. And immediately there is a calm. What would you have done? I've often thought, what would I have done? And then Jesus turns his attention to his faithless disciples. Notice what he tells them. Folks, this is very important for us to read. Maybe we should put this on our refrigerator or somewhere in our house. How is it that you have no faith? He doesn't say little or small, no faith. Why did he say that? They have faith because they're following this man. But why would Jesus say that? Well, if you're following him and you're with him, then leave everything to him. That's the point. And of course, verse 41, and they feared exceedingly and began to say to one another, who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Well, as I mentioned, they're afraid before, now they're afraid after. They became afraid of Jesus then. Remember what happened when Jesus came up to Peter and James and John that day? They were coming in from fishing. And Jesus said, did you catch anything? No, we fished all night. We haven't caught anything. Well, why don't you go back out there and throw your net on the other side? Okay. Got nothing better to do. So they do, and they catch such a large number of fish that it's beginning to sink the boat. Remember what Peter said when he got to the land? He ran to Jesus, knelt down, and said, depart from me, I am a sinful man. You see what happens when we are confronted with the supernatural? It scares us because we're not supernatural. They became afraid of it. Their fear was placed on this one who could speak to the wind and it obeys. I'm not really sure that's a healthy fear. It's a worldly fear. We are to fear God with a healthy, a godly fear, a great respect. But again, as I have to ask this question, what did they expect Jesus to do? They woke him up. What was he supposed to do? How many prayers have been offered to God and we didn't believe he would answer when we offered it? And how many times as we read through these four Gospels do we see that Jesus healed based on a person's faith? We walk by faith, not by sight. That ought to be in every household. Something to remind us. I'm afraid that many walk by sight and not by faith. How many times did Jesus heal a person? As you have believed, let it be done to you. You say, well, Brother Keith, how do I get to the point where I can truly believe what God says? Put him to the test. Put him to the test. You want to know a way to test God? That he says you can do this? In the area of your money. He said, test me. See if I will not open up the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing you won't have room to receive it. But we don't want to do that because we can open our wallet and look in there and see that, can't we? Yeah, there's $1 or two in here. I'm going to hang on to that until Jesus comes. Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, God says you can test me in that area. And when God starts answering prayers in the area of finance, our faith begins to grow. Say, how in the world did you get from this account here to finance? Test God. The disciples did not know when they got out on the sea that time that there was a storm coming. They didn't know that. They didn't have Doppler radar. And yet it was not rain, it was wind. Doppler radar doesn't show wind, does it? We are to walk by faith, not by sight. George Mueller, one of my heroes of the faith, I forget how many orphanages he started in London during his lifetime, and I forget how many million pounds went through his hands as he took care of those orphans because he believed God. And he was invited to speak at a place outside of the London area where he had to take a boat. He came down to the shipyard to get on the ship, and there's a big fog. You can't see very far at all, maybe 10, 12 feet. So Mr. Mueller gets on the ship and goes up to the captain and says, Captain, how long will this fog last? Well, they've been known to last weeks. And Mr. Mueller said, well, Captain, will you join me in praying that God will lift this fog? I have to get to this appointment. The captain said this, and probably every one of us could put ourselves in his shoes. Well, I'll pray with you, but I don't think anything's going to happen. What did Mr. Mueller tell him? That's fine, I'll pray by myself. He got down on his knees in front of this captain and began to pray, and the fog began to lift. Folks, that's an actual story. That happened. Now we quit living according to what we see and start looking at what we cannot see. Don't walk by sight and not by faith. I'll tell you, this passage has convicted me. I pray it has you. How deep is my faith? Your faith? Do we really believe our Heavenly Father would be so callous as to not care for us? If he would send his Son to die for our sins, will he not take care of us? Faith is a commodity that I think is sadly lacking in churches today. And I'll tell you one more story and I'll be finished. A church down south of us, probably about 25 years ago, was in trouble financially. They went to their association of churches, much like the one we have here. It was a Baptist church. and they told the associational missionary, we're in trouble, and we know that you have a fund set aside in the association to help churches that are in trouble. Yes, we do. Well, how much is in that? About $28,000. That would really help us get back on our feet. One pastor at the meeting where they talked about giving this church that money stood up and said, are these people praying that God will answer their prayers, or are they just coming to you to bail them out? Well, they didn't listen to him. And they gave them that money. Today, that church doesn't even exist. When we get in trouble, what's the first thing we do? Well, let's look to the government. Or let's look to our bank account, or let's look somewhere else. Folks, when will we start looking to God in heaven, who has his hand on everything? I pray this morning you will spend some time reflecting on how you show your faith, because I have to. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for this story. Yes, it's very convicting, because I can put myself in the shoes of the disciples most of the time. And as the Apostle Paul said some years later, these things were written for our instruction, that we might read them and the Holy Spirit of God deal with us and increase our faith. But many of us are like the father to that little boy who was epileptic. Say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I think that's a good prayer. And I think that's a prayer God hears. So, Father, I pray we will turn these faithless part of our lives over to you. And increase our faith as we learn to trust you, not in huge, great ways, but in very small ways, and then you will increase our faith as time goes by. Father, I firmly believe in your word there are many people that started out with baby steps in trusting you, but you accomplished great things through them. May that be said of us. Thank you for speaking to us this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you.